We know that since the time of Ned Kelly, Victorian police have had an interesting relationship with crime and criminals and their own issues. The Lawyer X case is just something out of crime fiction, but it's crime fact. Manny Konditsis is a well-known criminal lawyer here on the coast and certainly well qualified to speak about the issues involved there, which cut right to the heart of our legal system. Manny, good morning.
Good morning, Scott.
Manny, just take us back to Lawyer X's early days. The formative years are fascinating before she became a lawyer, aren't they?
Well, it is indeed, and by way of some brief background, she comes from a prominent and influential family. Her uncle, indeed, was the former Victorian Governor, Sir James Gobbo, and he was a judge of the Supreme Court between 1978 and 1994. So her family tradition is steeped in the legal field, and notwithstanding all of that, I think in recent years there's been a significant estrangement between her and her immediate family. And then if we move forward, she's studying law, and then in 1993, while she's still a student, she was living with a couple of flatmates, and police raided that property in which was being rented and found 1.4 kilos of methamphetamines. And her and her mates are charged with drug trafficking, drug supply, very serious offences. As it turns out, some point after that, the trafficking charge against her is withdrawn. The trafficking charge against her flatmates proceed, and they are convicted of those offences and handed down a very significant period of imprisonment which they serve. The charge against her, as I say, was withdrawn. She's only then pleaded guilty to a simple possession charge, and a conviction isn't even recorded, which therefore entitled her to still be admitted as a lawyer once she finished her exam, because she was then still regarded, it might have been arguable, but she was regarded as still a person of good repute. If she'd had a trafficking conviction, I dare say there would be no way that she would have been admitted as a lawyer. So that's significant.
Yeah, very interesting part of the history that people may not be aware of. Goes on to be a lawyer. What she was doing, which is quite extraordinary, playing both sides, what does it mean for client confidentiality? Legal privilege. Is legal privilege a really important part of our entire system, and why so?
Yes, Scott, it's a good point that you raise, and you can call it a number of things: lawyer-client confidentiality. You can call it client legal privilege. You can call it legal professional privilege. But let's stay with the term, for present purposes, of client legal privilege, because essentially it's the client's privilege. It's not the lawyer's privilege or anyone else's privilege. It's the client's privilege. It's fundamental to the criminal justice system. Indeed, not only the criminal justice system, but to the justice system overall. So why is it fundamental? Well, there are a couple of principles. One is that without having that trust between the lawyer and the client, the administration of justice will fail. And indeed, the High Court said in a particular case that and I'll just quote a little bit, not too much of it, the proper administration of justice requires that clients are able to communicate freely and frankly with their lawyer without fear of disclosing any information relevant to the legal advice they are seeking. It is well understood that in the absence of the privilege, legal proceedings may be delayed or even miscarried, as lawyers may not be able to properly represent their client or bring relevant matters to the attention of the court. So let me pause there. So that relates to the administration of justice objectively viewed, not to the subjective viewpoint of the client. I'll get to that separately. So that's the first fundamental point. It's for the administration of justice. Then we go to the second fundamental point of it as to why it's so fundamental to the system, and that's that the privilege is also regarded as a fundamental individual right derived from the right to privacy and the right to protect from the state, particularly where regulatory or investigative powers are used as against them. There's another principle that's been brought out by the High Court on that point that I've just mentioned, which is all about representing the right of the citizen to protection, particularly those that are weak, the unintelligent and the ill-informed, against the incredible power of the modern state. So bring it down to its simple terms, I suppose, particularly in relation to the last point. How would you feel, how would your listeners feel if they're talking to their lawyer, whom they're paying good money to represent them, tell their lawyer something in confidence and only to find that not only has the lawyer spoken about it, but it's spoken about it to the opposition, in this case relevant to the criminal justice system. The opposition would be the police and the prosecutors.
But it could be just as damaging in family law or any aspect of, in commercial or property law, or any of those areas of law. This rule would apply across the board, wouldn't it?
Indeed, it implies, and so it implies to not just the criminal justice system, but to the justice system.
Yeah, so it's a cornerstone of the justice system.
Indeed, and to use and to take it up from where your point, which is a good point. Say you have family law proceedings, and you're the husband, and you have a lawyer in an acrimonious, or even doesn't have to be acrimonious, but let's say an acrimonious family law matter. You as the husband tell your lawyer certain matters in confidence for the lawyer to retain, and up to the lawyer's discretion how it's used, and then you find out that in a conversation your lawyer's had with the other lawyer in a bar somewhere that has disclosed that information and it's ended up in an affidavit in court against you. I mean, you'd be horrified. So yes, it applies across all jurisdictions in the justice system.
And you can imagine the mayhem we'd have in property transactions or in commercial law. It'd be just really the whole system would fall apart, wouldn't it? Because there'd be insider trading, there'd be people, leveraging through information. I mean, it's just very important that there's a great deal of integrity in people in your role.
Well, there has to be, and again, on the property side of things, a very simple example might be there might be negotiation about price about something, whether it's a property, whether it's a business, whatever.
They say, well, we're probably prepared to go to $500,000, but we only want to pay it. We think the property's worth this. That lawyer goes to the other lawyer and says, they'd go to $500,000 if you really pushed it. I mean, it just opens up a can of worms.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that would completely undermine the trust between the lawyer and the client, and the system would just collapse.
And has this particular case, these allegations that have been revealed, has this caused damage to your profession, do you think? I know it's specifically a Victorian situation, but can the legal system recover from this?
Well, in my view, it can. And taking your first point first, has it caused damage? I guess you'd have to say it must have caused some sort of damage, because people are questioning that sort of confidentiality. I've even had clients speak to me about it, not about, when I say about it, about the Lawyer X situation. And so you explain to them as best as you can what the position is. So I dare say there are plenty of people in the justice system that are speaking about it, and I don't mean just lawyers. So if they're talking about it, and if there's even the slightest concern that their lawyer might betray their confidence, well, then that's causing damage, and it's causing damage, to the system, to the reputation, and so on. So hopefully, though, this situation with Lawyer X is going to be very isolated. Having said that, I pause because I understand there are other lawyers directly or indirectly associated with the Lawyer X situation that are also being examined. So we'll have to wait to see how far it stretches. But that said, my overwhelming view is that the legal profession will maintain its integrity overall. It's like in any other walk of life. You get some bad apples and things that occur that shouldn't occur, and And it's been that way since time memorial, I guess. So
it also may make us appreciate this very important part of the system, a part of our democracy, and perhaps cherish it more and be more vigilant as well. Sometimes we need a case study like this to understand what's gone wrong and perhaps not repeat these mistakes. Is that something that the lawyers, professional bodies are looking at as well?
Well, I hope they are, because it's a good point. Sometimes, as you say, something has to go wrong to and threaten a particular right, a particular principle, to appreciate the importance of that principle. Lawyers who've been practising a while would take this sort of confidentiality in principle. It'd just be second nature to them. But there'd be plenty of young lawyers coming through that may not think in those terms. So the publicity surrounding this case, and there'll be much more to come, I'm sure, certainly brings to the focus and to the forefront the importance of the principle and to maintain it.
Manny Konditsis, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your time, and it does cut right to the heart of our legal system, and thanks for sharing the law with us again. It's a fairly simple one, this one, and sadly it has been breached down there, so hopefully people can still have great faith in your profession.
Happy to be with you, Scott.